Thanks everyone for joining this conversation. I'm really excited to be here in this virtual space with these people. Our panel today is sort of a crew of people that I greatly admire and respect and have enjoyed working with so much, and I learn a lot from in all of our interactions. So I'm really excited to share that with all of you. My name is Giselle. I am part of the Slow Food USA team. I work alongside Anna and Felix. The Plant a Seed campaign began about 5 years ago. This is the 5th year of the campaign. It was sort of launched by Anna before my time with Slow Food USA. So we're now in the 5th year of this campaign, and I think it just keeps getting sort of more colorful and cultural and exciting. So I'm excited. I'm really excited about this year's kit. Before I jump in, I want to do a quick thanks to Mama Karen and Jim for a really deeply inspiring conversation. And just a reminder that there's so much to learn, and I get really excited about that learning. And this whole event has been such an incredible opportunity to learn. And I also want to thank Jeff and Allison, who's probably in the chat over here, for their amazing, and like lots and lots of work to make this happen. So quick thanks to all of them and to everyone who's been a part of it. This has been really interesting and inspiring. So the Plant a Seed campaign, I think this, on the heels of our keynote, our closing keynote, I think this is an extra interesting conversation because you all are the proprietors of seed companies. And so you are sharing your seed in this particular way. And in, well, not all, we have seed growers, seed savers, historian, and farmer all on this panel. So we get a lot of perspectives here, but I think this is where we have to merge the sort of spirituality and stewardship of seeds with the business of seeds. And I'm excited to hear from you about that, particularly because we've worked together, Bevan and Owen and Zach and I have worked together since the fall to sort of map out how much do we need, how can we make this work. And it was really important to me to try to pull in some of these growers for this year's kit because you are so very intentional about what goes into your catalog and knowing the history behind it and the story behind it and sort of bringing that into what you do as a seed company, so that it's not just a standalone product, that we get to connect the seeds, the seed packets we get in the mail with all the history behind them. So I'm not going to talk too much. I want to just hand it over to most of you, and we're just going to take time for each person on this panel to tell us about a different seed in the Plant a Seed kit, in this year's Plant a Seed kit, which is currently on sale. We'll put a link in the chat. I'm really excited. We already have requests for about 200 kits from school gardens. We send them to school gardens for free. So I'm really excited to get those out to them. And it's an exciting time for me because I have all the seeds in my possession. So I have all these really nice little seed packets that I'm going to pack up and send out. To get us started, though, I'm going to call in Jeff to talk to us a little bit about the Arc of Taste and give the example of the Garden State tomato. Jeff and David both are part of our Arc of Taste committee and have been long involved in the work of the Arc of Taste and preservation of heirloom seed varieties. I'll turn that little ding off. So Jeff, if you can jump in and talk to us a little bit about the Arc of Taste and then about the Garden State tomato and how that sort of pulls together.
Okay, thanks, Giselle. So the Arc of Taste is Slow Food's biodiversity project, and it's a catalog of local foods that are at risk of being, becoming endangered. So what we do is we document these foods and we write these histories of them. And there are these really great narratives and stories of people who have worked to preserve them or had brought them with them to certain communities, or it's the history of what they're about. And then we use these stories to connect the public to them with chefs and farmers and seed savers. So it's a great project. It's the reason why I'm an activist in the food system, is because of the Arc of Taste. I discovered it when I was familiar with slow food from the late 90s, but it wasn't until around 2010, 2011, that I discovered the Arc of Taste. And once I discovered that, that committed me to becoming an activist in the food system. So, the tomato I'm going to talk about, the Garden State, is an example of how a food can disappear, so to speak, from the local community. And it's interesting because it has this marquee to it that it's a tomato called the Garden State. And New Jersey, we're known as the Garden State, and we have been known for the Garden State since the 1880s. It wasn't officially our motto or our nickname until 2017, but it's been on our license plate since the 1950s. And we grow a lot of tomatoes here, and the Jersey tomato, has some iconic status with, thanks to Campbell's and the cream of tomato soup and the grilled cheese sandwich being an iconic comfort food combination. And when you look at Warhol's soup can series from the early 60s, the tomato soup is the most popular one out of that. So the question in my mind is, how does a tomato called the Garden State become functionally extinct instead of being in the backyard gardens of many people? And the reason being is that it's a Campbell soup variety. Campbell soup was, when they were in New Jersey and they were doing their farming and their food production here, they had a tomato breeding facility in Riverton, New Jersey, where they would breed a lot of tomatoes, and they would bank the seeds and share the seeds with the farmers for their crop. And the Garden State was one of their varieties, and because they weren't commercial, the seeds weren't commercially available because Campbell's wasn't in the seed business, they were in the food production business. Unless you were in that closed loop of being a farmer to get the seeds from them, there was no access to them. So while the tomato was named for the Garden State, it wasn't widely available. But the interesting thing about this is that I found this in a seed catalog from a company called Leddens, which I had mentioned earlier about the Kili No. 7 seeds. And because there was this local company, it was a local farmer supply company that when my family moved to New Jersey in the 60s, we would go there to, get the stuff that we needed for gardening. And they had this great seed room. So whenever we would go, the first place that I would always go was go to the seed room and check it out. Because, for me, being a kid, it was just this wonderful room filled with all these seed packets and, barrels of seeds. And it just, it created a sense of wonder for me at that time. And so when Campbell's left, they took their seeds with them, and the farmers didn't have to save the seeds because they were provided by Campbell's every year, and so there was no seed libraries or public places that would be able to store this collection of tomato breeding history. But there was Leddens, and Leddens, as I said, was a local farmer supply company. And it was in their catalog. It was in this catalog here from 1955, where I found the listing for the Garden State tomato. So evidently, because Leddens was connected to so many farmers, some farmers had saved some seeds, and they were able to create enough seeds to sell the seeds because it's listed in this catalog. So once I started getting into seed saving and working with seed libraries, I started looking for seed catalogs because seed catalogs are an important part of research into the history of seeds. And when I saw this one from Leddens, I had to buy it. And when I first look at any seed catalog, the first thing I look for is tomatoes because, I'm a tomato guy and tomatoes are life to me. So, when I opened this one up and I saw the Garden State, I was, immediately inspired to look for seeds because I wanted to grow it, and I couldn't find them. And I, put it aside and thought, okay, well, we'll see what happens with this. And then a couple years ago, I connected with my alma mater, Stockton University in Galloway, New Jersey. I was talking to Ron Hutchinson, the professor who runs the farm there, and we were talking about a lot of things. And I mentioned the Garden State tomato, and he's a tomato guy too, so we had a lot of things to talk about for that. And a week or two later, he got in touch with me and told me that he found the seeds for this at the USDA germplasm bank. So he was able to get me seeds for this, and we're going to grow it with the Center for Environmental Transformation in Camden, which is an urban farming program that works with the community. They hire the youth in the community. They teach them about farming. They teach them about the business of growing food. They teach about nutrition. And I've worked with them a couple times on growing the Campbell soup varieties in Camden. And Camden is where Campbell's headquarters still is, and it's always been there. I'm also working with the community garden in Gibbsboro, New Jersey, for them to grow some of these seeds out. And there's 2 seed libraries that I'm going to be working with in Camden County, one in Haddonfield and one in Cherry Hill. And we're going to start building a collection of Campbell tomato soup seeds at these seed libraries so that they never leave Camden County again.
Excellent. That's really interesting. Thank you, Jeff. And speaking of tomatoes, we'll just move over to Bevan here, who we don't have the Garden State tomato in this year's kit, but we do have this Old Carolina tomato, which I know Jeff is also an enthusiast of, and this comes from Bevan of Small House Farm. Bevan, I'm going to let you tell everyone a little more about yourself. I'm really excited I am also a tomato fiend. We had a tomato in last year's kit, and we have another one in this year's kit, but I think this one is a rare variety. I think we're lucky to have it. And what I'd love for you to talk about, Bevan, is the story of this tomato, and also kind of why is it rare, and why do you grow rare varieties? Like, what is your sort of motivation or drive to do so? And what is it that you love so much about this tomato?
Sure, Giselle. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to tell a little bit about this thing. The reason that I love the Old Carolina tomato, the story is, to me, it represents how, just like a seed story is alive. It's not static. It's always moving. It's always in motion, and it changes. As we learn more about the history of things, the story will change. But even as we move into the future, every time we grow and save these seeds, we add to that story. We become a part of that story, So the Old Carolina tomato, the story starts for me in 2016. I was at the Sustainable Mountain Agriculture Center down in Kentucky at a seed swap hosted by Bill Best. Now, Bill Best is kind of like a superhero. He maintains the largest collection of Appalachian beans in the nation. Very well documented, just great guy. He can spend all day telling stories. And he puts on this big seed swap. So folks like me, we come from all around. It's like a pilgrimage to come to this event. And it's a pretty busy event. And during this particular seed swap, a young man came over to my table and said, "Hey, I've got these seeds that came out of this old lady's freezer in North Carolina. They've been in there for 50 years or so. I don't know if they're any good, but do you want them?" Of course I do, right? So I was like, I would love to have these seeds. So I took them home. I didn't think a lot about it. The next year I grew them. I got like 70% germination on these seeds. They were big whoppers. We're talking like 1.5 to 2 pound tomatoes, just these big, beautiful bicolors. It was such an exciting thing. But in all of the excitement, I never got this kid's name. I never got any other information. I had nothing except for this tomato, right? This Old Carolina tomato. So we even offered it on our website right away because we just wanted to share it with folks. We had 10 seeds. That's what we started with. So we got to get this out to the public, right? So we started sharing it on our website, and I didn't think much of it until the pandemic. When COVID hit, we had a lot of more spare time, and we started an Instagram for Small House Farm, which I'd been pretty resistant to that. I don't have time for those things, but suddenly I had a lot of time. So we started this Instagram page where we could share stuff about what we're doing at the farm, pictures of the seeds we're selling or whatever. And we shared a picture of the Old Carolina tomato. And sure enough, somebody gets a hold of me. His name is William, and it's the kid that I got the seeds from when I was in Kentucky, found me on Instagram. Wow, right? Super exciting. So I'm talking to William, and he says, he goes and looks in his records, and the only information that he had written down was the name of the lady, and her name was Nell Bryson from Jackson County, North Carolina. So there's my lead. So, everybody's on the internet. So I start searching through Google and stuff, trying to find this Nell Bryson in Jackson County, digging the best that I can. And with younger folks who are involved in social media, you can find anything about anybody on the internet. Very easy to find everybody's information. But Nell Bryson was an older lady, and she did not have an Instagram page or Facebook. And I could not find anything about her at all, except for on a Yellow Pages archive, I found a list of some of her family members. And on this, I found her daughter's name, Deborah Bryson. So I searched for Deborah Bryson, and I found an archive, a newspaper archive, that had an article from the 60s about the Bryson Farm Supply. They were celebrating their 20th anniversary as a family business. And there was a picture of young Deborah with her little apron on behind the counter in this little black and white photo. So I got on the Facebook and I found Bryson Farm Supply. And sure enough, it's still a business. So I called them. I called them up and told them the story of what I was looking for. And I just happened to find the day that Deborah was there. Deborah didn't work full-time anymore. It was just by sheer coincidence that she happened to be there, and I got to speak to her. And she remembered those particular seeds. Now, Nell, her mother, who's still alive, is unfortunately not in a mental state to really be aware of a lot of things that are going on anymore. But Deborah certainly remembered those seeds. And they'd actually been in there since 1948. So when I'd gotten them, they'd actually been in the freezer for 68 years, these seeds. Deborah wasn't much of a grower, but her husband, before he had passed away, was. And he was the reason that they actually decided to save some of these seeds out of the freezer. They don't know how they got there. They don't remember anything. Nell couldn't share that story or anything like that. But I've got the seeds. And thanks to Slow Food USA and the Plant a Seed campaign, we can now share this seed with school gardens and growers all over the country who get to enjoy this beautiful tomato. But also when they save their seeds, they get to maintain the story. And Nell Bryson and everything that she's done lives on forever. And that's pretty awesome stuff.
Bevan, I also think it's awesome. And this reminds me that we did a Slow Food Live together in which you showed us how to save seeds. And I think you had some tomatoes in there, at least reference to it. So we'll throw a link in here in case you want to follow along with Bevan to save your seeds. I'm really excited to grow this tomato and have it in the kit this year. So thanks for getting that our way. It's wonderful to hear you talk about that. So from Rowan to Karen and all the days in between of this summit, the thread seems to be the importance of relationships and sharing the seeds. That it's not a technology, it's not a commodity, that this is a thing we have to share for them to survive. And I really like that somebody offering up those seeds to you is the reason we now have them in our kit, and that people can grow them in home gardens. And that's just so important. And I really like that it's been such a big part of our conversations over the last several days. So Owen, I'm going to turn to you now, and we have the King Philip corn from True Love Seeds in the kit. I'm loving all of this packaging so much. This has been really fun, and Owen, thank you for your hard work in getting these to us with a very, very high germination rate. And I want you to tell us about yourself. Owen's in Philadelphia, and the King Philip corn, and maybe also a little bit about the relationships you have with the growers of the corn and why that's an integral part of what you do and how you do it.
Sure, thank you. It's really nice to be here with familiar faces and people I've been wanting to meet for a while. And great to be able to witness and be part of Mama Karen's and Baba Jim's talk as well. So the King Philip corn, well, so I co-founded True Love Seeds with my partner, and we decided to focus on King Philip corn for with slow food. I worked, before starting True Love Seeds, I worked for 4 years with William Moyes Weaver and his Roughwood Seed Collection here outside of Philadelphia. And every winter we would go through every single jar in his collection. He has 4,000, at that point, 4,000 varieties of heirloom seeds in a collection that had been started by his grandfather in the early 30s. And he had found in a deep freezer. It's another freezer story. But the King Philip corn was one that he would go through them. The old seed packets he would throw away, so he would give them to me instead, and I would try to germinate them, and a lot of times they were great. And so I had packets of King Philip corn from Dr. Weaver, and our model with True Love Seeds is working with our own farm, but also at this point up to 50 growers who are community oriented, food justice oriented, and really focused on cultural preservation and their own ancestral and regional seed varieties. And so one of my friends who was in eastern Massachusetts and originally Wampanoag territory wanted to try growing this corn back home where it came from. And so I sent him a bunch of seeds to grow out for our catalog. And so the story of King Philip corn, King Philip is the English name of a Wampanoag leader who was also known as Metacom. When the Puritans, the English came to eastern Massachusetts to Plymouth in 1620, it was the Wampanoag people that they met. And there was a agreement with the Wampanoag people around the use of that land, particularly with Metacom's father, King Philip's father, Massasoit. And when he passed away, the kind of leadership got passed down in the family. Eventually, Metacom or King Philip was the leader. And at first, he was kind of trying to make it work with the English, but he ended up leading the kind of resistance to British occupation of their land because of all of the grievances they had with the English people kind of killing off Wampanoag people and encroaching in on their land. So that kind of started the King Philip War in the 1670s, early 1670s, which eventually led to the death of thousands of Wampanoag people, hundreds of English settlers, and also many Wampanoag people being sold into slavery. So it's a very bloody, maybe one of the bloodiest or most bloody colonial war, and it's been named for Metacom or King Philip. So that's where this corn gets its name, is from this leader. And so it's an opportunity. It's a heavy history, but it's an important history to be able to share in these school gardens that we're working with, to kind of lift up this story. And there's, of course, still Wampanoag people today, just like most indigenous tribes are still around today. And so this has become an opportunity as well for us to connect this corn back to its original land. Last year, we worked as well with the Food Project, an organization outside of Boston and inside of Boston, to grow this corn, because we knew we needed a lot of packets for this program with slow food. So we worked with both farms, and over the years, I've developed a close relationship with Rachel Sayet from Mohegan, which is the territory that I grew up in. And she was able to introduce me to her friend Danielle Hill, who may be on at this point here with us as a participant, from Wampanoag, Mashpee Wampanoag. And so we've been talking over the last few months, and this year they're going to be developing new land and also working with existing Wampanoag farms to grow this corn with their communities, with elders, with youth, developing internship programs. And the sales of this corn go back to that project now. So the fact that Slow Food was able to invest in a huge number of packets for this program means that money goes both back to the growers as well as back to the tribe. So this is how we try to build relationships with our growers and with the people from whom the plants and seeds come from. And so, more about the corn. It's a flint corn. The Roughwood Seed Collection has what they consider to be a pre-improvement all red strain of the flint corn. In the mid-1800s, early 1800s to mid-1800s, John Brown of Long Island, who was then growing in New Hampshire, kind of took this strain and quote unquote improved it, crossed it with dent corn, and made it an earlier harvest as well as a more productive harvest. But according to Dr. Weaver, this is a pre-John Brown strain of the King Philip corn. And so, over the years, it was considered one of the best corns of New England and Lower Canada, and was even crossed with other varieties to make what were considered even more productive corns. But of course, as there's been so much corn breeding for productivity and of late for resistance to chemical applications, this corn has kind of fallen out of favor and was only kept by, small farms and seed savers. And so this is a way for us to lift up this story and bring back this historic corn that over the years has actually taken on many different names. and also connect it back with the original people from whom it came in a meaningful way that supports their land and foods and seed sovereignty in the process. And so was there something else I wanted to say about that? You know, there's two other quick things. One is the timing of this is exciting. This new relationship we're building with the Mashpee Wampanoag people, as we just learned last week that the federal government, you know, under Trump was trying to reverse a decision around land sovereignty with the Mashpee Wampanoag people and take away the designation of a reservation. And now in the last week, the US Department of Interior has kind of walked that back, probably in a huge part thanks to all of the organizing of the Wampanoag people and their allies. So this is happening at a big time in history where there was this fear of losing even more of the land sovereignty of the Wampanoag people, where actually now there's been this win where they're actually going to keep that designation. So yeah, I think that's what I have to say about it now. And I'm grateful to Slow Food for kind of giving us this kind of push to really invest in the story of this corn and the relationships we have around this corn. So thank you for that.
Owen, we're really happy for that too. And I think part of this corn, and Anna and I speaking about it last summer, was kind of this idea of what if the Plant a Seed campaign could be sort of a catalyst to put certain varieties in the ground that maybe there's not a big market for, there's not a huge demand for, but it's important to us to keep them in cultivation. So I'm liking moving in that direction, that because we're packing hundreds of kits, could this potentially be a way to get some things into cultivation that might not be otherwise in that sort of volume. So I'm going to move us over to Zach now, who's coming to us from Minnesota, and has sent the early Scarlet Horn carrot for our Plant a Seed kit as well, which I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm like, this is the real baby carrot. I've had to talk through this for a lot of people recently, like, oh, baby carrots aren't like a real thing, but there's this one that might be similar. And Zach, we got to work together last year to put together some audio stories for your podcast about the varieties we had in last year's kit. And I would love for you to tell us about the early Scarlet Horn carrot, and also a little bit about you are currently connecting with Indigenous communities in your area to talk about this carrot, and the importance of going through these channels and making those connections and relationships in order to sort of capture the full story of something like the early Scarlet Horn carrot or any of the varieties of last year. It's difficult to kind of get all of the voices in the room, but obviously really important. So in the room, you know, whatever version of a room we have these days. So I'm going to turn over to you to tell us about the carrot itself and the story behind the carrot, and then maybe a little bit also about the storytelling that you do.
Yeah, thank you, Giselle, and thank you for everybody having me on here. Feels like a big honor just to be able to share and hear everybody on the panel. And the last presentation has been great. So thanks. I just want to note that the carrots, they do get kind of big. They are this heirloom type, so there is a wide range of diversity. They're small, but if in fertilized soil, they'll get to about 6 to 8 inches long. The picture doesn't show how big sometimes they do get, but yeah, we'll get to the carrot in a minute. I guess my brief story is came to Minnesota, northern Minnesota, working with Winona LaDuke and the White Earth Land Recovery Project about 2012, and was just really interested in the history of seed saving on our land. I was working on sustainable farms up until then, and just realizing so many sustainable farms, or farms that called themselves sustainable, weren't saving their own seed. So my thought was to learn from the people that had been saving seed for the last 10,000 years. What better way to learn? So dove into working with the White Earth community as a Vista volunteer and helping out with the Indigenous Farming Conference. And pretty much right away, just asking Winona and helping out with the seed work that they had been doing. Went to seed school at Native Seed Search and learned a little bit more there, and then finally getting plant breeding masters down the line. But just meeting seed keepers, and one of the first people I met was a woman, Caroline Chartrand, who is Métis from the Manitoba area right above us, 4 hours away. So after a few conversations with Caroline, I just visited her, and she needed a bunch of help with her seed inventory. So ended up staying a few days, and it was the week, I don't think, got above negative 25 degrees in Winnipeg, which was kind of fun. We couldn't start my car for a while. So we were stuck together, talking seeds, and just learned so much from her and her experience with the seeds that were from her Métis indigenous community. And for people that don't know, Métis is it's a recognized indigenous tribe community with mixed with European and indigenous ancestry, and they're the community that created those big, beautiful Red River wagons, and have their distinct cultural history with jigging and music and arts and culture. And so Carolyn wanted, I think it was in the 90s, she was looking up the crops that the Métis community had grown in the 1800s, and she had this list, and she couldn't find a lot of the crops. A lot of them had disappeared, and she couldn't find access. And I think the one place that actually did have access to the early scarlet horn carrot, which was one of these varieties that their community had been growing and eating for the last 200 years, was the early scarlet horn. And I believe it was Seed Savers Exchange had I think it was two growers that were growing it out. So it was like that close to becoming an extinct variety. And I guess my theme of us growing it out and growing it out with Caroline is kind of the story of resilience and how to get there to have more and more growers, because Caroline was saving the seed for a number of years until 2004. So the seed was sitting on the shelf essentially for 10 years. She had gone through some health issues, and myself and Tiffany Travers, another Métis grower, were starting to grow out this carrot again. And the seeds were 10 years old, but Caroline stored them well. And through growing them together with more people, we kind of creating that backbone of support to be able to grow out something like a biennial seed isn't just like totally as easy as saving, let's say, beans, for instance, because you need to save the carrot. There's a lot that goes into it, and a lot that could go wrong. And there's a lot that had gone wrong because it's a learning experience. You have to save the carrot stecklings and then grow them out the next year, and there's a lot to it. And then you have to also be aware of Queen Anne's lace, and that could cross into your carrots, and and kind of that's the wild carrot strain. So yeah, after 2014, growing out the seed together, me, Carolyn, and Tiffany in Zone 2B in Saskatchewan, we're kind of growing it on these different regions, and we're also sharing seeds with people that we know. So I've been working with a network of growers here in northern Minnesota and growing the carrots out with people that are excited about them. And I'd say like the first thing that got me interested in specifically in the carrot is just like, it's an amazing carrot. It's like really thick. It's like these like kind of thick stubby carrots, and really high level of carotenoids, deep dark orange color, really sweet. One of the sweetest carrots I've eaten. They grow really well. So we've been growing them out I've been growing them for the last 4 or 5 years. And through growing them together, we've increased the seed supply to the point where it's not just a few seeds in a jar. Now it's pounds and pounds of seed, and selecting for what they used to look like, finding some old records of how these carrots used to look, because when you're selecting, you want to be able to preserve these heirloom varieties. And I just started North Circle Seeds last year. We have only open pollinated seeds, no hybrids, meaning you could save the seeds yourself. We just became certified organic last year, and we're part of the open source seed initiative, meaning we're pledging never to restrict genetics. So we have a variety pledge this year, and we're looking forward to not only preserving the important heirloom varieties, the important cultural relevant varieties, but also having fun and breeding new varieties as well. So we have a podcast that Owen put in there, and Owen's got his podcast, and I actually had the pleasure of interviewing David last year, David Shields, with the yellow cabbage collard, and we're going to be doing some more stories this year about the carrot and some of these varieties. So stay tuned to both mine and Owen's podcasts on seed stories, and look forward to answering any questions or any thoughts. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Zach. You can plant a seed page, and there are stories that Malia, one of our team members, worked on with each of these growers in there. And also, if you kind of hop down to look at last year's campaign, you can connect to the podcast stories from last year that Zach put together. They're really fun and interesting to listen to. Also, a note on that is all of this content and all of these stories are going to the schools that the kits go to as well. So I'm really happy to have young people, very young people and young gardeners sort of exposed to those stories. And we've talked a lot in the recent months about arc of taste and slow food in general being about not just biological diversity, not just also cultural diversity. And we have David and Mimi here. I'm so happy you both are here. Thank you for joining us. And they're each going to talk about one of the varieties, but Mimi is a farmer in the Hudson Valley. David is a professor and historian, amongst many other things, and deeply embedded in the histories of lots of these arc of taste varieties and beyond, of course. Both a wealth of knowledge on all of this content. So David, I want to turn it over to you here to talk about, I think you're going to tell us about Aunt Molly's ground cherry, and then we'll hop over to Mimi to talk about the Jimmy Nordello. And then one thing I'd love to talk to all of you about is sort of your sense of stewardship in this work, in whether it's farming or saving seed, or compiling those histories and figuring out how to communicate them. What is the sense of stewardship that's sort of wrapped up in that? So maybe David, I'm going to send it over to you to tell us about the ground cherry, and then we'll get Mimi on Jimmy Nordello, and then we'll take some questions from you all as well. So if you do have a question, throw it into the chat for me, and then I'll ask our panelists. So David, over to you.
Okay, I actually prepared a little PowerPoint so that the kids could take a look at this, and I gave it to Jeff. I don't know if, yes, here it is. So let's go up to the first one here. And the Aunt Molly's ground cherry is a husk tomato. And you'll see that there's, in the eyes of most culinary people, there's a kind of division about what the important husk tomatoes are in the United States. And it divides into the purple tomatillos and what we now call the ground cherries, which tend to be yellow. You want to advance the slide now here? But truth be told, the family, the Physalis family, which is a branch of the Solanum family, which is the big family of tomatoes and eggplants and nightshades. This Physalis family actually has around 70 members, and the diversity is tremendous. And they range everywhere from sort of weedy little items like the horse nettle, which is the plague of eastern lawns. I have a horse nettle here that I photographed from a lawn that I tend. And various Midwestern sorts of physalis, which mat parts of the prairie, to the ones which were savored by Native American tribes as a kind of relish. It was chopped up and often eaten in conjunction with fish. And the yellow ground cherries were particularly savored. I've given the generic name on the first of the slides here so you can look it up yourself. Want to advance it now here? But though Native Americans were eating these husk cherries or these ground cherries, it wasn't until the tomato undergoes a kind of rehabilitation in the 1840s that people actually start thinking about chewing on these native mini tomatoes that grow in husks. If you've read Andrew Smith's famous book on the history of tomato in America, you discover that the tomato was only eaten in the South in any quantity prior to the 1840s. And then just like green tea in recent years was medicalized, the tomato was suddenly made a kind of panacea, the natural vegetable answer to what ails you, and a 180 transformation of attitude towards the tomato from negative to positive takes place. And this is the precondition for the rise of the ground cherry. And the ground cherry gets people focusing on it in the mid 1850s. And here is a 1858 Philadelphia blurb, which talks about this plant, which has been put but recently into our list of edibles, is destined to prove as valuable an acquisition to that list and to be generally cultivated as the tomato. And it grows to the height of 2 or 3 feet with branches trailing on the ground, on which account it is sometimes called the ground cherry. And there you have the name by which we know it now. Advance the slide here. So 1858 is the breakout year. And in the way that seedsmen of the mid-19th century did, they played fast and loose with names. And they were more interested in magnetizing money. So they would sell it under the name the strawberry tomato or the Cape gooseberry or the winter cherry. There are about 9 names which appear in the space of 1856 to 1862, the introduction period into cultivation. But we see a major move made by Hovey and Company, one of the biggest seedsmen in New England, behind this. And it's decided that these mini husk cherries have a kind of dual attraction to them. The very best flavored of them have an interesting balance of sugariness and acid, and they make interesting pickles. They can be made into jam, and the Pennsylvania Dutch at this juncture, outside of Philadelphia, start making them into a kind of signature pie. So ground cherry pie made with yellow ground cherries becomes the standard 19th century mid-Atlantic preparation for this. I want to advance the slide here. So one of the major attractions is the fact that they've got this nifty, pentagonal husk around them. And there are various types of the physalis, the alka-kengi, with this orange and red, becomes the Chinese lantern plant. And numbers of people start growing them out in gardens, not to eat them, but just because they look nifty. So we have sort of two streams of cultivation. The one which is interested in the coloration of the husk, and the one that is interested in the flavor of the cherry itself. And you want to advance this now. And Aunt Molly's ground cherry is one of the offshoots of this latter stream. Now, it has to be said that of ground cherries, a lot of them, particularly those that were developed from wild cultivars, had a great diversity of taste, and some didn't. Some tasted insipid. There's a famous passage in an Edith Wharton novel about eating insipid ground cherry preserves out there in the middle of Nebraska. But one of the things that happens is that a number of people begin tweaking and seed saving to create the absolute best balance of acid and sugar. And there are two yellow streams that are both available. One is the Bonsel's Cossack pineapple ground cherry, this wonderful cherry that was developed out of a USDA GRIN accession from a Polish ground cherry. And this is the one which tastes like tropical fruit. And then there's the Aunt Molly's, which is a yellow improved landrace, which tastes more like the traditional wild cherry, the one that captured the fancy of the people in the 19th century. And so here's this interesting story of a plant that was not consumed by Euro-Americans until medical thinking changes, and all of a sudden, almost overnight, it becomes a thing. It becomes a thing as a garden ornamental. It becomes a thing as a sort of food cultivar. And ever since, it's been one of the charming little minor crops of the American garden.
Thanks so much, David. It's amazing how quickly that can happen. And I think a lot of our work is to prevent the opposite from happening. I'm loving in this chat lots of mentions of pies, as you mentioned, and jam, and even sorbet. Allison mentions it was in a flavored trial. I'm new to Aunt Molly's ground cherry. This will be my first time growing or eating them, but the more I ask people, the more people are saying, oh yeah, I've had tons. They seem fairly easy to find in some parts of the world. And we're going to move over to Mimi now to talk about the Jimmy Nardello. And so this makes me think of sort of a similar thing. I don't think the Jimmy Nardello is terribly rare at this point. And we've had these ongoing discussions in the Arc of Taste Committee of like, well, if this is a list of endangered plant species or plant varieties, what happens when they're really doing well? And the sort of general outcome of this conversation is like, well, that's a good thing, right? I mean, this is kind of the goal of the Arc of Taste, is to increase exposure, increase cultivation, increase usage by restaurant chefs, which Mimi, I know you work with a lot of chefs or have in the past. So Mimi, if you can tell us about the Jimmy Nardello and a little bit about that. So I'm curious to know sort of why you grow rare varieties. I know that you grow a lot of different things, and some of them are rare and some of them are not so much. And how do you come to choose what you grow, and what's your experience with growing the Jimmy Nardello? Uh-oh, we need to unmute you quickly. There we go, perfect. You're on.
Now you've done it again, David. Made me in the mood for our Aunt Molly's ground cherries. We're going to have to wait till about August, though. That's what seems to happen with the Arc of Taste, is that once you start delving into the story, and David's history is exactly what we do with the Arc of Taste. Jeff and I represent the Northeast region of the United States. And we go back in history, we fall into different rabbit holes, connect the best part of the stories that we can save and keep and profile on the Global Slow Food Arc of Taste catalog. It's a way of honoring these foods, preserving them, and returning them to our plates. And I've been very happy to revisit Jimmy Nardello. He's an old friend. Jimmy and Molly have been in my field for many years now, so I feel like I know them. It's a very intimate relationship. They certainly nourish me in so many ways. Right now, I'm on the east end of Long Island. I've left the Hudson Valley, and I feel like a student of the earth all over again, because I humbly had to find my place with the wind and the light at the very tip of Long Island on the North Fork. So I hail from the East End right now. Here in the Northeast, as Jeff and I do our research for newly nominated foods, we have a robust diversity to explore, both of wild and cultivated foods. And our exploration travels from pre-colonization right through the 1950s. And we seek and honor those foods that originated from Native Americans, African and European cultures. And these cherished seeds are not only hidden and refrigerated for 50 years, but they've been woven into hair and placed into suitcase linings, sewn into hems of dresses and hats, and traveled in the hulls of ships for trade. It's a very precious cargo, the seeds that have carried through these routes, because they symbolize cultural identity, ceremony, tradition, folklore, healing, as well as nourishment. And Jimmy Nardello has one of those stories. And I was delighted in preparing this story that I was connected to Jimmy's granddaughter, Aloha. She's from Hawaii. And she guided this story for accuracy and then just a little brightness of her memories. The story goes that Giuseppe and Angeline Nardello resided in a southern mountainous coastal town of Ruoti. And I'm sorry to my Italian friends for my Italian. And that is in the Italian region of Basilicata. And I can almost imagine standing in the Nardello's terrace garden, overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea, and feeling the wind and smelling the salt, the brininess of the air, the dryness, the light. I remember visiting Italy once for Terra Madra, and I got a driver who was telling me that I arrived just in time for tomato season. And I wondered why the San Marzano has been so elevated, and we seek it out all the time when we're making our sauces. And he simply said that the coastal views was the reason why these tomatoes tasted so wonderful. So with that view, we turn into the garden of the Nardellos, where they were growing a variety of traditional foods, including the frying pepper, the sweet frying pepper. The Nardellos left their tiny town for the United States in 1887. And at that time, they had their 1-year-old little girl, Anna, and they settled into Naugatuck, Connecticut. Angeline started her garden with the seeds sewn into her dress hem. That's exactly how those seeds were transported. And her garden flourished along with her family. She and her husband had 11 children. It was the 4th child, Jimmy, who was the only child who inherited his mother's joy of gardening. So he began to learn from her the Italian techniques of planting and tending these vegetables, and also following the phases of the moon in their planting. He built the terrace and expanded the terraced gardens. It's interesting to note in their journey that when Jimmy entered grade school, his teachers decided to drop the I from Nardella. And it was believed that the teachers thought that this was the proper way of spelling their name. So their legacy shifted over the sequential descendants and generations, with Nardello being spelled as we see it in our seed catalogs, Nardello. As an adult, Jimmy acquired 2 lots in the same town in Connecticut. One lot was for his home, and the other was for his gardens. And his granddaughter finally remembers, and this was her word, the magnificent garden tended with these ancient Italian practices and honoring the cycles of the earth. Jimmy shared his seed legacy with Seed Savers Exchange before he passed away in 1983. Seed Savers is a wonderful place for the safekeeping and preserving of America's plant diversity and heritage seed. His granddaughter and I wondered what compelled him to give this gift to all of us. And I imagine it was his great pride, passion, and generosity. Jimmy Nardello peppers are prolific plants. They burst with these ornamental red fruits that ripen to red fruits that slightly taper at the end. Their flavor is mild, sweet, with a fruity finish. Jimmy would seek out, as his first harvest selections, the ones that were in the shape of a pig's ear, because that's what his father did. On my farm, we tend to have coffee and breakfast out in the field, and it's not uncommon at lunchtime to go out to take a ripened red Jimmy Nardello pepper. It just hydrates you with these lush bursts of flavor. It's a wonderfully versatile pepper for grilling, roasting, sauteing, frying, and drying. And each pepper holds us this connection to the past. And the art and science of saving pepper seeds is a wonderful first step in saving seeds. It's a very simple process. Just use your eye to select a mother plant who presents herself as the most robust and healthy. Open up the fruit, and in the walls of the fruit are the seeds. So you can gently remove them. If they keep a little pulp, you can rinse them a little bit, and then place them on an absorbent piece of paper. If they need a little rinsing, just lightly, and then dry where there's good air circulation. And those seeds can then be placed in a cool, dry place and have a shelf life. Now I'm feeling more optimistic about 50 years, but definitely a shelf life to 4 years. So in the spirit of Jimmy's generosity, I hope you're inspired to grow them in your gardens or on your farm this year and keep that lineage alive. Thank you.
So much, Mimi. So much, Mimi, that I love that story, and I love the idea that it's the view. And I think as stewards of these products, that what seems to be the distinguishing factor is that treating the plants like they really do have a life of their own, and they're not just a product that needs to be like pushed out, grown in volume. And I think that's a big part of what sort of Slow Food USA sort of stands for and what you all do in your work. And your story also reminds me, we talk a lot about food waste, of course, the idea of food waste, which I still get so frustrated when, Microsoft Word wants to correct this word. Like I just would like for it to finally be in the dictionary. But I think what it makes me think of is a lot of our foodways are absolutely rooted in seed. And so foodways are the idea that food moves around, but food only moves around with people who move around, at least to go across oceans. And many of you have referenced sort of the way a seed arrived in a place. And what we're doing here is connecting it with the people who brought it there, the people who cultivated it, the people who kept it alive. And trying to tell that story. So I don't want to keep you for too much longer. We only have one question, which goes to you, David, and that is if we know who Aunt Molly is. And then I would love to just kind of open it up to all of you in conversation to talk about your own notion of stewardship and how you are not just stewarding this themselves. I think you're also stewards of the stories and the foodways by which they arrived to you, and what that sort of means to you, and the balance of being a seed saver, a seed grower, a storyteller, to make sure these things stay alive while also keeping them connected to their origins, and the people that are connected to that place. So I'm going to hand it over to you, David, to tell us if you know who Aunt Molly was, and then just want to leave it open to all of you, maybe to connect with one another and talk a little bit about that concept of stewardship and balance in your work.
Yeah, Tom and Julie of Territorial Seeds had an aunt named Aunt Molly. That's who it's named after. The folks at Territorial Seeds were the people that located this particular improved landrace and brought it back. And that's how the thing was named. So it's there's an actual figure that we know of, and who knows, she may still be alive, although this has been out here for a while. So
well, I want to encourage you. I see, Bevan, you just unmuted. Leave that open to you, but I also want to encourage all of you. We've put the links to all of these folks' seed companies into the chat. So, and I see that some of you are already excited to kind of peruse those catalogs. I am like sort of at my most childlike delight when I'm in the garden or gardening or planting seeds, in their catalogs make me really excited to get back in the garden. So I encourage you to jump in and check out those collections when we part ways. If you have something to add, I'd love for that.
Speak a little bit to what you had said about, stewarding seed stories. Here at Small House Farm, everything that we do is very, very small scale. All of the seeds that we offer, I grow here on our property. So I spend the whole season with them from seed to seed, kind of sharing my time and my stories with them, and I think that it's the story of the seed and of the seed saver are intricately entwined. That to me, there is no difference. Without a story, there is no seed, and without the seed, there is no story. And to me, the seed keepers themselves also have stories. So what we do with our seeds and the work that we do is really try to focus on the story of the people that have carried those seeds as much as possible, because I feel that the seeds carry the identity of everyone that's ever grown that seed. And then it becomes my responsibility, if I'm going to save that seed and pass it on, I have to pass that story with it, because they are one and the same. And that's a really big part of the work that we try to do here.
I want to say one thing. One of the great problems of doing plant histories and sorting out stories is the problem of naming, and that certain ingredients bear as many as a dozen names. And in the 19th century, if there was a successful plant introduced by one seed company, another seed company would plant it out and offer it under their own name. That's how the Hayman sweet potato becomes a Dixie Queen. And fortunately, in the 1880s and 1890s, the experimental stations, when they did their tests of various categories of vegetables, bought every variety from every seed company. And they often said, this is identical to this and this and this. And those experimental station reports are the key that allows you to cut through a bunch of nonsense. So I just want to alert you, if you're going to do researching of the stories of seeds and it gets back beyond prior to the 20th century, you got to use some of those things in order to help yourself out.
I dig what you're saying, David, and I'd like to add to that. I do find a lot of seed companies tend to fabricate seed stories in order to increase sales. Unfortunately, that is something that I see far too often as a problem. But even outside of that, this nefariousness of it, I see it, especially like I spent a lot of time down in Appalachia, and there's a lot of seed savers down there, and they tend to name beans and things after whomever shared that seed with them. So you can find the same seed from county to county with different names just simply because folks didn't know the name. They named it after the seed saver that shared it with them, and it can become very muddled trying to track down the histories of these things because we have so many names for what essentially is exactly the same bean. So yeah, but to me that makes kind of the detective work of it all a little bit of fun too, right?
Anna made a comment that happens with recipes too, and I think like a lot of cultural dishes in my own heritage, I found this to be always the case. 9 different names for every dish that my Lebanese family makes. So I'd go eat somewhere and order something, and I would be like, I know this dish, I just call it something different. I also wonder about your reflections on how that naming is also sometimes a way to honor. I think last year, maybe Zach, you can speak to this. We had the Cherokee purple tomato, and just exploring the name and how it got that name, and all of that was really interesting. And it does this sort of like honor the people that kept it alive, that shared it, or how do you navigate different languages that come in for seed naming? Sometimes things arrive here and then they get called something different simply to put it in English. And how do you sort of navigate figuring, sort of debunking those or deconstructing them, I should say. That's the right word.
Yeah. We had that seed story with Greg. Bad with names now. Who named the Cherokee tomato, and really interesting interview. He's just like the tomato guy. He's got like hundreds or thousands of tomatoes, and like sometimes when you're gifted seed, it's like, and you don't know too much about this particular seed, and you really love it. It's like you just try to do the best you can with like, I want to share this story, I want to share this tomato. I'm just gonna name it something, and there's I think if we're naming something for a particular tribe or group of people, you might want to ask and just see. But he was gifted that seed. But you can listen to the story. But he was gifted that seed by someone that was from the Cherokee tribe, and it was his way of kind of honoring where the seed came from. But it was just funny because I was like talking with some people doing food sovereignty and seed work in Cherokee Nation. I'm like, so what do you guys think of the Cherokee tomato? You want to talk about it on the story? And they're like, we don't really associate ourselves with that tomato so much. And we don't, know why it's named what it is and all this stuff. So it's like, everybody's kind of got their own opinion, but then at the same time, it's like, just kind of keeping in mind when you're naming something too, like, is it for, a group of people that might not associate with that food too. Craig Collier. And I've kind of run into that a little bit too with naming some of our varieties, and it is a really interesting conversation to be had, and naming new varieties versus naming old varieties, and mixing genetics together, and having fun with the varieties as well. As like talking with a bunch of indigenous women that steward squash varieties. That I've heard the story over and over, is like with corn, it's like very particular. It's like red corn, different names and different methods to keep them pure. But then with squash, I heard over and over again from many different indigenous women, is like, it's just kind of just mix them all together, like green squash, orange squash, and you're getting this mix. So it's kind of interesting with how we treat purity, I suppose, with some of the varieties, and within the families of different seeds and different species, they're kind of treated differently in different cultures too. So I think it's a very messy. It gets very messy very quickly when you start naming things, but at the same time, you want to honor the people that have either bred that variety or worked with it, as well as the long-term history. So like doing those things together, the short-term history and the long-term history, it's always going to be a messy world, especially when you're growing open pollinated varieties that can be seed saved, and then the story can change. Like Bevan was saying, like it's just this story that keeps adding and changing in every direction that it goes. So so yeah, that's my 2 cents, I suppose, on naming variety.
I was going to say something different, but it is interesting to think about this purity question. I've heard of it referred to actually by Rowan White and another friend of mine who's indigenous as a very like colonial concept of, you know, thinking of how we think about heirloom vegetables is an interesting obsession with this purity. I mean, of course, there's records, you know, and practices that are ongoing of indigenous people who knew not to grow different varieties of corn together in terms of the crossing that could happen. But also, you know, it's not been that way with every type of crop. And so what I wanted to say was, you know, someone mentioned in the comments that there's, it's also interesting to look at which plants are considered ornamental now, but are traditional food plants. And looking back at that, I believe I saw that in the comments of this conversation. I was, for example, I was given, well, one big example was dahlias, which are called coco social in the Aztec language of Nahuatl. And we work a lot with that crop to kind of look back at and look at the current realities of how people are using dahlias for food, and kind of breed back good eating dahlias. But I also received some seeds from an Austrian friend of striped toga eggplant, which is considered by seed growers to be an ornamental plant because it's such an unusual looking eggplant. And as I was trying to dig through the records of this plant and not going very far back, I realized it was renamed because of its, you know, being considered an oddity. It was kind of attributed to Togo, maybe. Somehow it got the name Toga. But it's simply a striped garden egg. It's simply a very common West African vegetable that was then taken and made into a product for kind of non-African customers. And so sometimes, you know, these stories, we have to kind of uncover the fact that these are actually still being grown and eaten by somebody somewhere, and we've just gotten some kind of usually Europeanized name of something that's still a traditional food today. And so finding ways to honor the people, like you were saying, Zach, talk to actual Cherokee people. How is this used, if at all? Sorry, my family just came in the room from outside. How is this being used now? What do people call it, and how do they use it? Those are important questions, and I feel like you were getting to that, Zach, what you were saying as well.
Thanks, Owen. I also want to mention that you at True Love, you have an Diaspora Collection, which I think is really wonderful. And in several of those varieties, you're giving them both names I've seen. And I'm hoping you can speak a little bit to creating that collection and why you did. Karen Washington, Mama Karen mentioned it in her talk as well, and how that's helped to sort of frame the work you do and your, I guess, your motivation or your connection to the products. I hesitate to call them products, but what you're creating.
Yeah, actually, I co-founded the company with my partner who just walked behind me, who is African American from the Mississippi Delta, and on his farm, he has a focus on crops from West Africa and the South. And so as we founded the company together, that was his particular focus, and he helped me kind of build up this African Diaspora Collection with some of my other coworkers who are also Black and focused on their ancestral crops. And I'm, you know, Italian from Southern Italy and from Ireland in terms of my ancestry. So we also have a Southern Italian collection, and Jimmy Nardello's in there with some other frying peppers and a bunch of other awesome Italian crops. And so it's just part of our work, each of us who work with True Love, to grow our ancestral crops, to honor where we come from, and to be connected in that intimate way with the food that we grow. You know, for my ancestors, we assimilated into the US, and I was not passed down these traditions. So for me, it's an act of reclamation and relearning. And for other people I work with, like my partner, those were never lost. And so we're using this catalog as a tangible project of holding on to our cultural crops. So I'm definitely interested in heirlooms in general, but when I moved from working with William Moyes Weaver to starting True Love Seeds, my focus shifted to people stewarding their own varieties, which is why we're very excited to work with the Wampanoag folks in growing this particular corn. And we, in general, kind of heed the call of people like Rowan White in terms of rematriating seeds, not just to other people, but to our own ancestries as well. And so that's kind of been our approach in creating the African Diaspora Collection, the Italian Collection, the Middle Eastern or Syrian Collection, and so on. It's really just about those relationships we have with the growers themselves. And then wanting to promote that because it's, you know, I know for African Americans, it's been difficult to find those historic varieties, and you can imagine why in terms of how history is kept and how land is kept or not kept. You know, there's so many barriers. And so an African diaspora collection or a, you know, Syrian or Middle Eastern collection becomes that much more important to be able to find all of these historic varieties in one place, both historic and current, because we include West African varieties now that are still being grown and eaten there. So that's part of why we do it.
Thank you, Owen, and thanks to all of you. We just have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna kind of wrap us up here. I think that's a really interesting reflection, and I started gardening as a young adult, and I think when it got really exciting, it was always exciting, but when I started to feel more connected to it was I thought, okay, I'm gonna grow in my garden the things that I use to make dishes that I have a connection to, my sort of cultural heritage dishes. And so it makes me think the idea of heirloom, the idea of heritage, the idea of purity, like, you know, they can be kind of problematic, and authenticity comes to mind, which is I think that those concepts are highly personal, that an heirloom is an heirloom if it's sort of yours. It changes shape when it's yours, or when it feels connected to you and your story. So I think that of growing and telling these histories, like that seems to me to be the piece that is really ripe for making change, that it gives people a way to connect. If you're Italian, if you're Syrian, if you are for part of the African diaspora, that you can connect with your own culture, your own history, your own food ways in growing seeds, and encouraging people to take it all the way back to the seed, not just a dish or a recipe, and to kind of name and honor the things that we're using in our foods and our food ways. So thank you for your work. I appreciate that so much. I think that that's the direction I like to see us moving, is that we stop putting these boxes around whether it's pure or authentic and start leaning into, you know, what does it mean to be heirloom and why is it important for us to hold on to it? Well, it's because it's important to individuals and to communities, and their stories are of premier importance in those conversations. So thank you for that work. I'm gonna open it up if any of you have another comment before we go. Thanks to all of you who have been listening in on this conversation. I feel really honored and really glad to see all of you on my screen and to be part of this conversation and to work with all of you. So thanks for that. So if any of you have another comment before we go, jump on in. Yes, Mimi. We have to unmute you. There we go.
Thank you. So this is very validating to the work that we're doing on the National Ark of Taste. Mm-hmm. Our exercise over the last year, nearly a year, is to go through the stories that are on the Global Ark of Taste from our regions in the country, and to make sure they're as authentic as we know they are. Obviously, the stories get broken. Many times when I list a nomination for the Ark of Taste, I'll include several names for that very same product because the story gets broken, renamed, disappeared. And I think that the other project that the National Ark of Taste Committee work on that's very relevant is we're winnowing out the crops in our regions that have lineage to Native Americans and Black culture, because those stories cannot be complete unless they have the enrichment of those populations. So we're working very diligently on the Arc of Taste with the bits of information that still exist to capture that truth and honor those origins.
Hey, everyone, just echoing what Mimi was saying, just started, I think, like the last few weeks working with our new Midwest Arc of Taste person, Gian Calabrese. And I don't know if it's appropriate or not to say, like, if you're interested, if you're from the Midwest on this call, because I think we're looking for more people to kind of go through this vetting process of what's on the Arc of Taste and to authenticate, like Mimi was saying. So as the Midwest is kind of getting our act together, maybe that's appropriate to get in touch with me, Gian. So get involved. Arc of Taste.
Yes, absolutely. And if you visit the Arc of Taste page, you can reach out to Mimi and Jeff and each of the folks that sort of manage the Arc of Taste in each region. You can reach out to them. If you're in the Midwest, reach out to Jeannie. And yes, get involved, start growing. Tell us what you're growing. Tell us how it goes. So thanks for your inspiration and your time, all of you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.